The old silo model it just doesn't work anymore.
Can we just have PR die? Because I think that term should be retired, killed off, disintegrated. It should go away.
No one's harder than our own folks for the best reasons. These are skeptical folks, type A, working hard, heads down on clients.
The point about brand refreshes, we know from doing them that a big part of them fail.
We are increasingly in a zero-click environment, and people may not go directly to a website and review somebody's carefully crafted material. They may simply ask, or they may just get served a summation.
Things like press releases that perhaps had gone by the wayside are now back.
Welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Steve Halsey.
And I'm Ann Green.
And today we're talking about brand, but maybe not brand in the way that most people default to thinking about it. Because when people hear the word brand, they often think first, Ann, about the external expression, the name, the logo, the visual identity, the website, the campaign, the launch moment, all that fun stuff. And it matters, of course, but increasingly, you and I are seeing that the work of actually building a brand, and especially relaunching or reintroducing one, is much more operational, much more cross-functional, and much more deeply connected to trust these days than perhaps it once appeared from the outside.
Oh, I completely agree, Steve. And that's why I'm so excited for today's conversation that we're going to be sharing. I recently had the chance to speak with Megan Noel. She is Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Covista. And Covista is a new brand, and Megan's been right there in the middle of the work of helping to bring that identity to life. And what I appreciated so much about the conversation, Steve, is we didn't talk about brand as a surface level exercise. We really talked about it as an enterprise level undertaking. And it's one that really requires corporate affairs, marketing, comms, HR, internal teams, business leaders. I mean, pretty much every major partner to be aligned around what the organization is, what it promises, and how it earns belief from the people who matter most, whether inside or outside the walls.
And that is such an important distinction, because the shorthand is still often that brand, quote unquote, belongs to marketing. Even though chief communications and chief corporate affairs officers are owning the corporate brand more and more these days. And to be clear, marketing is obviously essential to building a brand at both the product and corporate levels. But when brand is treated only as a product or marketing functions, I think that's when organizations miss the bigger picture. They can miss the connection to reputation, to culture, to employee understanding, to stakeholder trust, to public affairs, to risk. I could go on, but ultimately to leadership behavior.
Yeah, and that's one of the pieces, relative to this conversation that I think you and I have watched over the years, and I've been thinking a lot about in the context of this discussion today. So we know a brand launch is just one small piece of a larger and ongoing effort. And I think what I'm mulling over most now is a brand has to be contextualized. It has to be made legible so stakeholders can really understand it, and even more important, find their own ways into it to personally connect. And it has to have a meaning that is both believed but also believable. And that has to be delivered across the organization. And this means employees need to know what the impact is of their actual day-to-day work. Leaders need to understand how it connects to business strategy. External stakeholders need to see evidence that a brand promise is real in every single touch point. And the organization needs to have enough internal coherence that the experience matches the expression in every channel and at every touch point. And that is way harder, I think we acknowledge, Steve, than writing a positioning statement or even launching a new visual identity.
Yeah, I think it certainly is. And this connects to something we've been talking about often on this podcast this year, which is the idea of narrative as an operating system. And we see that when a narrative is strong, it gives the organization a way to make choices. It helps people understand what matters, what the company stands for, where it's going, and just how to explain that in a consistent manner. But conversely, when the narrative is weak or when brand is fragmented across functions, every team can end up telling a slightly different story, Marketing says one thing, communication says another's, leaders emphasize something else. And in that situation, employees are left in a situation of trying to interpret it all on their own. And the brand loses impact in that case. And then the market gets the muddled signal. And this is especially true today in the age of AI discovery, as we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting. Today, I've just been working on a project where we're trying to apply that lens of corporate as a operating narrative as an operating system for an organization that is feeling fragmented that way. And that, I think, is where corporate affairs can play such a powerful role. One of the things that Megan and I discuss is how the function is actually sometimes misunderstood, especially chief corporate affairs officer, which is a less known title to some. And I think the issue is people still say public relations as a shorthand for our field, and I know where that came from historically. They're often thinking of media relations, which in reality, the remit of communications is so much broader. It's truly amazing in its breadth. And frankly, that's been true for a long time. I mean, as long as you and I have been in the field now, Steve, which is over 30 years. So corporate affairs and communications leaders are typically working at that intersection of reputation, stakeholder engagement, employee understanding, executive positioning, public policy, issues management, culture, risk, trust, and ultimately, I think one of the most important is business impact. That is a super wide lens. And in a moment where organizations are under more scrutiny from more stakeholders, that wide lens is not a nice to have. It's really, really necessary.
Yeah, and that also means that the old silo model just doesn't work anymore. Brand obviously has a C-suite steward, but it does not, and I believe it should not just live in one department. Just like reputation does not live in one department, trust does not live in one department. And as we all know, risk certainly does not stay contained nice and neatly within one department. So the work really requires a much more matrixed approach. And corporate affairs, they have to partner with marketing. Marketing has to partner with HR and people team. Internal communications has to be connected to external communications, legal, policy, operations, digital sales, IT. I mean, you think about all these components and the senior most leadership, they all have a role to play here.
Yeah, I want to sit on this internal piece for a minute there too, because I think when you and I both started in the agency world, Steve, internal communications was often treated as secondary to the external push. You'd launch something externally, and of course, employees would be informed. And sometimes it worked better than others. Some folks took it really seriously from the beginning. But the real attention and the real gravitational pull was usually on the marketplace, the media, investors, customers, policymakers, whoever those external audiences might be. I think that narrow view of internal comms has changed, or at least that should have changed, because employees are not a secondary audience. You've heard my metaphor, Steve, the drop of water falls in the pond, and that first ring that radiates outward is your own people. They are the carriers of the brand, they're the interpreters of the brand. And in many ways, they are the first test of whether a brand is credible.
And that's such a good point. I mean, based on experience, if employees do not understand the story or if they don't believe the story, it becomes very difficult for the outside world to believe it. So you really have to succeed first internally with the brand before you can go externally. And then you've got this AI dimension that raises the stakes even further. I mean, we've talked about it before, how generative AI and search are just changing the way that people encounter brands. I mean, we are increasingly in a zero-click environment, and people may not go directly to a website and review somebody's carefully crafted material. They may simply ask, or they may just get served a summation of what a company does, what it stands for, whether it's trustworthy, and what its reputation is. So in an AI platform or just Google search for that matter, it's simply serving up a summary.
Yeah, and that means and we've been talking about this a lot, both with our, service teams, our digital teams. That story of the brand, the clarity around it has to be both human readable and machine readable. It's not the first time we've been talking about this, but it's as salient as ever. So it's not enough for the story to live in a launch deck or, a campaign platform. It has to be expressed consistently across the digital footprint. It has to show up in leadership content and employee communications and in media coverage, of course, and in own channels. And when your leaders are out speaking, thought leadership and videos. And basically, that broader ecosystem of signals that's so clearly, and we can really document this, shape how a company is understood today. And when that doesn't happen, and we're seeing this all over the place, the system, so to speak, fills in the blanks for you.
Yeah, and that really brings us back to I think the importance of partnership. You know, a strong brand today requires the creativity and market orientation of marketing, of course, but it also requires the stakeholder lens and the reputation discipline that comes from corporate affairs. It requires the support of sales. It requires the credibility that comes from employee engagement. And it really requires leadership alignment so that the organization is not just saying something compelling, but as you know, Anne, they're actually operating in a way that supports the promise.
Yeah, I think that's a core to me. We all know brand is not simply what an organization says about itself, but it's that cumulative effect of what people experience in the real world or digitally, what they hear, what they find, what they believe, and whether the organization behaves consistently over time, which is a callback to our wonderful Building Brand Gravity with Bradley Akabiro, who's talking about you got to know where you stand and stand there. So folks should check out that episode. But whether you're launching or relaunching a brand or simply seeking to bring the brand you have today more to life, I think the work is to create the identity and then create the conditions for that identity to be understood and trusted. And then, frankly, to ensure that that work never stops.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Ann. And to me, it seems like the perfect setup for your conversation with Megan because she has been working directly at that intersection we're talking about of corporate affairs, brand, internal alignment, marketing partnership, and stakeholder trust.
Yeah, she really has. I've known her for over a decade now, and she brings such thoughtful insights to the evolving role of corporate affairs and what it takes to lead this work inside a complex organization. She and I are both committed to the idea of working in a matrix. The other thing I love is she has a lot of perspective on career development in this field because she's been both quite a long time on the agency side and then on the in-house corporate side. And which was very nice. She was recently included among the 2026 PR Week Women of Distinction honorees, which is a great honor and one I'm very happy to celebrate with her. So, with that, let's hear my conversation with Megan Noel. I'm particularly thrilled to have Megan Noel on the podcast today. Hi, Megan.
I'm so thrilled to be here today, Anne.
Yeah, we've known each other now over 10 years. It feels like longer in the best way. But I'm going to ask you to tell a little about your role. But just to give our listeners some context, you've been on the agency side at Edelman for almost 10 years. The start of your career, tons of interesting clients. People can check you out on LinkedIn. But it was during your time at PwC where you had a huge impact on really, I think, transforming the communications function there for a decade, and most recently, senior managing director and leader of US and Mexico communications and corporate affairs. But today, you've got that chief corporate affairs officer role at Covista, and that's part of what we'll talk about today. But welcome again. And I guess I would kick off to say, not every single person is familiar with the chief corporate affairs officer role. I'd love to give you to get some context on that because I think people understand CCOs, CMOs, but tell me a bit about that role from your perspective and how you're playing it currently.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's one that I get a lot. It is still an emerging role within Fortune 1000 companies. Essentially, it's a CCO plus role. Um, for me at Covista, it incorporates communications, investor relations, government relations and public policy and public affairs, impact and sustainability, thought leadership, brand, and alumni. And so it's a really fulsome role. The reason that we put all of these disparate functions together at Covista is because Steve Beard, our CEO, wanted all the storytellers to sit together. So whether you're communicating to the media or employees or policymakers or investors, it's an opportunity for us to tell a consistent story and narrative across all of our stakeholders and all of our audiences. We are starting to see the role pop up more in Fortune 1000 companies. And I think, one, I'm just excited to see that, especially I think it was more prevalent in the UK or in European companies, but we're seeing it more pop up in US companies. And I'm excited to see that because it's a recognition at the highest levels with CEOs and boards that storytelling is a C-suite role and that storytelling to all of our stakeholders is something that is critically important to the business.
I think that's a very interesting way to frame it. And, in some ways, it's so funny, Megan. Sometimes it almost feels like saying storytelling is a cliche, but it's actually so, so critical. And framing, because when you went through the list of everything that you're engaged with, responsible for, it's a big list. But I can see how, like you said, that corporate narrative, the story is embedded everywhere within those roles.
Yeah, Sally Sussman, who is the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Pfizer for a very long time, probably one of the pioneers of that type of role and in the profession. She wrote a book and she has been on this road for a while and saying storytelling is a skill. And it is a skill that you have to develop, hone in, cultivate, refine. And by bringing disparate functions together, there's a recognition that storytelling is something that we have to get right, especially today and in a world where audiences, the way they get their information is hyper fragmented, trust is low. People are getting their news from social influencers more than they're getting it from top tier media. And so the way in which we effectively tell our stories or not can either drive growth, drive our reputation or not. So it is something that I think is increasingly recognized as a skill and a specialized skill.
Yeah, it's interesting. My colleague Steve Halsey, our chief growth officer who hosts the podcast with me, we've been talking a lot about this concept that he coined that I think it's not, other people think about this too, but he calls it narrative as the operating system of a company. That it's not just, oh, a message is something I've put on a messaging document for you to prepare for a given interview. It's just, what is that spine that goes through everything, or whatever metaphor you want, that is the operating system. And how does that narrative manifest itself? Does that resonate with you at all in terms of how you're framing this, Megan?
It does, and I know we'll talk about this a little later, but I think with the advent of AEO and AIO, that consistent storytelling is even more important because that's what the algorithms are using to reward companies that are doing that. And so, it's been something that we have spent a lot of time at Covista really trying to stitch together a consistent story across all of our stakeholders. So ultimately, we can build a brand that's trustworthy and that's tackling business and societal issues at the same time.
Well, let's get into Covista. This is a new brand. It's a long existing entity and an important one. For those that don't know, I've done a lot of work in the healthcare space over the last few decades, and health workforce education and all the roles is absolutely critical. But you got to play a part in conceiving and launching and partnering on creating a new brand. So tell me more about the background of how you approached it and obviously what Covista is, or Covista, so that people have grounding in what the entity is.
Yeah, it was one of the reasons why I was so attracted to this role. Let me step back and give you a little bit of history. Our prior name was Adtalem Global Education. It was a proprietary and diversified higher education organization. So we had a Brazil business, we had a financial services business, we had a little bit of a healthcare business. Over time, as Steve Beard took on the role of CEO, he made an investment in Walden, which is the third largest nursing school in the country, the second largest education school in the country. We made some divestitures, and we ended up with an organization between our five institutions that was 90+% focused on healthcare education. Yet, our brand and our positioning in the marketplace had not caught up to where we were as a company. And so the challenge and opportunity in building the Covista brand was a couplefold. One was to create a brand positioning that reflected both the business and societal challenge of tackling the healthcare workforce shortage at scale meant, and that we could be a big part of that. Second was to create an employer brand in the marketplace that would retain the amazing talent that we have. We have 10,000 colleagues and faculty across the US, and also be one that could be a talent attractor and bring in new and different talent. And third, is to create an enterprise brand that could sit alongside our institution brands and be a powerful force in the marketplace. Think about the way other holding companies like Unilever or P&G have made that transformation of not only having powerful consumer brands, but also having a powerful enterprise brand that can sit behind and stitch all of it together. So with that challenge, that was a place for us to take a look at how do we do this that can really hit on all of those different pillars and create a big mark in the environment. And typically, and that's something that's given to the CMO to do. And yet, Steve was again, he's so deliberate as a CEO. He gave that as an opportunity for both me as the CCAO and the CMO to partner on to bring to life together. So we created the name, the brand positioning, the we spent more time than I can count on the colors, which are so important. But equally, we did the work behind the visual identity. We refreshed our purpose, vision, and values. We created an employee value proposition. We had never had one before, right? And we started to bring an impact commitment to life to be able to underscore that we're here to drive growth in the marketplace, but also we're here to play a meaningful role in tackling that healthcare workforce shortage at scale in a big societal way. So it's been a career defining assignment, and one that I have thoroughly enjoyed.
It was great to see this unfold. I'd known you had taken the role and said, "Oh, this is interesting," and then watched this unfold and with great interest. And you're absolutely right. First of all, rebrands from the outside are often not well understood, even by the employees of an organization. It's easy to pick on a new name or just say, "Oh, what is that?" I remember when Verizon first launched, when Accenture first launched. These are names that are so common now, but it was easy to poke fun when you first see it, or, "Oh, what does that mean?" But you're so right that to do it fully, and it sounds like you have, there's so many pieces and parts. And I loved what you said about that equal partnership with your marketing counterpart, because you're absolutely right. One of my clients used to be Siegel and Gale back in the day, and it was often the marketing team that would work with them. So would think that you feel this work can't and shouldn't be done in a silo. What is your point of view? Why that partnership's so critical today?
Yeah, let me first just pick up before I answer your question around the point about brand refreshes. We know from doing them that a big part of them fail. So there's a lot of risk in doing brand refreshes. And when we were embarking on this journey, a lot of the data was the best that you can get to is neutral. And neutral is not what I strive for. And I being a competitive person and being someone that also wants to drive both business and societal good, I was like, "I know we can do better than neutral." But the cards are stacked against you, right? People are skeptical, everybody has an opinion, everybody can be a keyboard warrior and put their opinion out there for those to opine on. And we had a diverse stakeholder set, right? We had internal stakeholders, we had diverse external stakeholders. We're a regulated business, and so we had to consider that. We are focused in the US, but we have students coming from around the world. And so we had to be globally conscious while US centric. So there was a lot of variables to think about. And um, that I think made the challenge even more great when you are able to launch and there's positive receptivity in the marketplace from stakeholders. And so that's something that I just think as anyone that is going to embark on this, either as a part of their career or a part of an assignment within their portfolio, to really think about the brand risks, but also the brand opportunities that are part of this.
Which areas do you feel, based on the research and your own assessment and knowledge and those of your colleagues, presented the greatest risk? Is it those internal stakeholders and the diversity of them coming along for the ride? Is it really everything inside and outside?
I had the privilege at PwC to, as part of my role, to oversee change management. And that was so enlightening in so many ways because you learn that people hate change. Doesn't mean even if they don't like the status quo, they hate change more, right? And so that is the biggest risk, is whether you like it or not, it's familiar. You understand it. You know how to navigate it. In some instances, folks say, well, I was just starting to get the ad talent brand out in the marketplace, and now we're going to change it all again. And so to get people over the mindset shift around the change and get people to understand the why, and that why is going to look different for all different types of stakeholders, is the biggest hurdle that you need to do. And um, the opportunity there is, if you get your employees bought in first, then they could become ambassadors with all the rest of the stakeholders to help drive that change. But if they aren't bought in, they also can be the biggest detractor. So we knew when we were embarking on this, we had to do a heavy buy-in around our employee population, especially those who may say, gosh, I sit in this holding company, but I identify with the institution of which I'm a part of. Why should I even care about this holding company over here? And why should I have any sort of brand affinity to that? And so to be able to get people to understand that why and that change, and then to build that affinity even before we launched, was an important step along the way to making this a success.
This so ties to, I just had a conversation with David Grossman, whose recent book, The Heart Work of Modern Leadership, just came out. And there's a whole connection to this, listeners, listen to that one, come back to this one, tie it together. But let's go back then. So, the challenge, and we have to land this why, and it's going to be multifaceted work. And we want this to be the upside, not just neutral or worse. And you're partnering with your marketing counterpart. Why is that partnership important? And how do you, I think for some people, working across the matrix is difficult. It's much easier they don't love being in a silo, but it's a lot easier sometimes when you're kind of running your own world. What was the importance of working across that? And what are some of the things that you observed as you did it?
I've been really blessed throughout my career in my in-house roles that marketing has always been a peer and an equal partner. I know that's not the case, and I know that in saying that, that is a luxury that not every organization, whether you're a CCO or a CCAO, have. But in that structure, the CMOs have become some of my best friends at the organization, some of my biggest challengers within the organization, and ones that I have learned the most from. I think the communications function and the corporate affairs function can learn a lot from the marketing function. I equally know that the marketing function can learn a lot from us. So when you approach it from a point of learning and curiosity, and knowing that you're coming at it with slightly different perspectives, but with the same end goal in mind, that's when the best work happens. Even if there's some tough conversations, some tension points along the way. The CMO that I worked with on this one was super creative, and he could be able to push the limits on creativity that frankly I couldn't ever get to. I am very good at operationalizing the work. And so together we were able to create an amazing creative product, but also one that can flow through the organization and inside and outside seamlessly. And so by using that partnership together, we were able to create magic. And so I think you should learn and embrace a lot from the marketing organization. I also think for those of us sitting in communications roles and corporate affairs roles, you have to understand that success comes from integration and partnership. And that is a big part of the job. Yes, it's easy to sit in silos, but you will not be successful. Said differently, you probably won't have a job because success is being able to partner closely with your peers across the business, with your peers across finance, HR. You have to be dangerous enough, especially in my role where I'm a peer to the business leaders, I'm a peer to finance and HR and marketing. I have to understand the business segments and their strategy enough to be dangerous and walk into that room. I have to understand our employee engagement strategy and our talent strategy to go toe to toe with our HR leader. I have to understand our growth strategy and our AI strategy in order to go toe to toe with our CMO and our CDO. And I have to know the numbers enough to be able to sit down and have an intellectual and thoughtful conversation with our CEO or CFO, excuse me, and then stitch it all together to have conversations with our CEO. And so working within a matrix organization is absolutely critical. And I think that has made me more curious about the business, and it has forced me to lean in to understand avenues of our business that I would have not thought that I would have had to understand as deeply as I do in order to be successful at the role.
I couldn't co-sign hard enough on this conversation. You and I have both worked with so many organizations across our career. I've been 34 years on the agency side, and I've had just immense privilege to work with hundreds of clients across sectors, many different sizes. And there's so many wonderful organizations out there, and the people are wonderful, but we're also in those normal human systems and mindsets that can hold us back in ways we don't even see. And like I said, I find working in a more matrixed environment so wonderful and inspiring. It really gives me energy, but it takes a lot of that emotional intelligence and human skill to relate to each other, and also the rigor and the curiosity, pushing yourself to learn and to be bold, to build relationships, though. I mean, communications folks know how to do this, but it's just interesting because as I was alluding before, I find humans find it, as much as we chafe being in a silo, that hierarchy can be a little bit more legible. And there's a normal human thing of us versus them, like, this is our world, what are you doing? And that's a normal thing. But that's actually something that brings me to my next question for you, because the idea of what is communications, how we widen our lens as we describe our function and our roles, and as you try to translate that to others, picking up on something you said, I've worked with marketers and advertising agencies and others for years. There is so much shared perspective and language, but there are nuances, turns of the dial that can be difficult to translate, where you don't even know you're not speaking the same conversation quite. So public relations is how we used to be known, right? And I think it's broader than that. So what is your take on what is this role today? What is communications today to you, Megan? How is it understood? How is it misunderstood?
Can we just have PR die? Because I think that term should be retired, killed off, disintegrated. It should go away. I actually absolutely loathe that word public relations. I think it doesn't reflect the totality, the intellect, the evolution of where our profession has gone, and the role that we play in supporting the business in a really fulsome way. And so when I hear that, I'm saddened by it. I also look to correct people, and I think over time, that has happened. I'll give you an example of this. When I took on the role at PwC, I think you know this, we were the PR department, and I called my boss at the time. I said, I have to change the name to communications. And we had a really big back and forth around that, and he was like, "Why? Why you guys do press?" And I was like, "But we don't just do press. We connect the dots, we reconcile diverse opinions, we help build and protect the brand in the marketplace." At that point, we were on the precipice of social media, right? And so we were starting to embark on new tools and new channels and be on the frontier of how people were communicating. And so I said it does the team a disservice internally and externally just to put us in this bucket. And I got him there, and we changed the name, and while the name changes seem just that is just it's a identity shift, it created an entire perception shift within the organization that we were seen differently, we were thought of differently in the organization, and most importantly, Anne, we were valued differently in an entirely new level. It wasn't just, we're going to call Megan and her team when we've made a decision and they'll put out a press release or they'll call the press. It was more that we're going to engage communications in a conversation and the risks and opportunities around that decision and how it impacts our stakeholders. And so, similar to where we're having brand conversations at the enterprise and organizational level, for our profession, the identity shift is so important. And I continue to hope that we get sharper on how we communicate that today, internally and externally.
When I took over the CEO role here at GNS, and now we've got 2 agencies under our integrated marketing communications group brand, that idea of integrated marketing communications was to me really important because we do many different things, including things that are understood as marketing, advertising, et cetera. And I wonder sometimes, it's interesting. I've been very involved with the PR council on the agency side. I've been on the board. There's a heritage to understanding public relations as kind of a unique field. But at the same time, I've wondered, it sounds so silly, but I've wondered sometimes that the initials PR also being press release is somehow, it sucks you into this vortex of diminishment sometimes. So, and it's been exciting. We're going to get to AI in a moment to sort of see how discovery and search is changing and how that changes it. But if there was one thing that, you've articulated so much about the richness of what is communications today, which I very much agree with. What is one thing that you would encourage corporate peers at any organization, not just Covista, to understand about what communications is today?
Yeah, if I was talking to business leaders who were still trying to understand and grapple with the evolution of the function, I would tell them a couple things. First and foremost is that we're beyond press releases or PR, and that we are really the dot connector and the integrator within and throughout an organization across all of our different audiences. Um, Second is that to see us as a business partner first and a storyteller second, right? Going back to the conversation around, we have to understand the business enough. A big part of where I think this profession has really evolved and has been front and center at conversations within the CCO and CCAO community over the past several years is heightening and deepening our business acumen. And if we are able to do that, then we are able to be true business partners to the organization and help them reach their employee engagement goals, or help them reach their growth goals, or help them reach their reputation goals, or help protect them from regulatory pressures that are happening. And so it just changes the whole vernacular. And I think that makes us a better partner to the business. And so that's what I would say to those folks who still maybe see something in the profession that is outdated. That said, the business leaders that I have encountered and work for, and maybe that's not by accident, the CEOs that I've worked for, deeply believe in the profession and the power of the profession to do amazing work. I've been so lucky. I've worked for 4 very different CEOs, but the red thread throughout each of them is that they believed in the power of this function beyond just the media and press releases.
And it's wonderful to hear, and they're certainly out there and growing. I do think that there's such a body of evidence that's coming from all sides about what are the skill sets needed for effective leadership today. I remember a few years ago, Harvard Business Review did a whole package on what is the CEO of today, of tomorrow, and things like emotional intelligence, ability to create followership, ability to speak and connect with multiple stakeholders, which is not all about performance. Megan, you do a lot of training of executives over the years. That's a specialty of mine. And it's far more than just, oh, I know how to plant and stand and project. It's so much about how they bring themselves to it. The other thing that's so interesting is in this world today, you see entities like Gartner reporting on, hey, as AI shifts workflows and workforce, things like sentiment, understanding human connection, counsel, crisis counsel, interpretation, dot connecting, a lot of those human skills, which are so central to the communications function, are going to be more important and not commodity. So I think those are the types of things that that I'm really looking at. Before we get into the AI of it all, which we have to, one area of communications that I've always thought a lot about, but I felt it was highly undervalued, especially, 35 years ago when I entered the agency world, was this idea of internal communications. It was often siloed off, perhaps owned by our colleagues in HR, which is very important. This incredible partnership. My chief people officer and I are joined at the hip in our work. But, or it was sort of a quote unquote backwater of comms compared to like if you're running around in an Edelman or a Burson Marsteller, it's like, I'm crisis, I'm corporate. What is your take on those internal audiences and the importance of that to your role today?
I'm thrilled that internal comms is finally having its heyday. I grew up on the external side. And so I deeply understand and value and have experience in creating a brand and a reputation for external audiences. Let me tell you a little story about this and why I think it's so important. When I was at PwC, I come in through the external route. I by the time I got done with that job or when I left PwC, I had every job on that team, but I was coming up through the ranks on the external side. And when I got into the external comms leader, it was around 2020. My CEO, Tim Ryan at the time, called me. We had just entered into the pandemic. We sort of early days and didn't know, right, how long this thing was going to last, what the impact it was going to be on our internal stakeholders, our clients, the organizations writ large. And when you get a call from your CEO with little to no context, most people get a little scared, a little worried, like, okay, what's going to happen here, and how is this going to play out? And he called me in early spring and he said, Megan, we we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. The real challenge, right? We have 100,000 people within PwC, all across the United States, and even more that spread across our acceleration centers globally. And a big part of what I want to be able to do is continue to do work for our clients. We need to be there for our clients, but we also need to be there for our people. So I'm nodding along and I'm like, yes, yes, of course, this all makes complete sense. And he said, with that, I need a real partner to help me continue to rally our people during this critical time. And someone that is going to take storytelling and stakeholder management and thoughtfulness to what we've done externally and bring that inside, and navigate a change that we don't know quite where we're going just yet, right? And it was a challenge that I was absolutely thrilled to take on, but also really nervous too, right? At the same time, he had said, we're going to go embark on a ton of changes. And so the internal comms and the change management side of the role need to go hand in glove. I had no change management experience. So to take that on and to lead an organization during the pandemic, to lead them through a massive strategy change, to lead them through major technology changes, and PwC did a brand change at that same time, was another career-defining move of I know will be of my entire career. But what that taught me is the importance of how to engage and bring employees along, that it's not just operational comms. There's things that employees need to know to do their job. But to your point about leadership and inspiration, it's the empathy, it's the engagement, it's how you reach your employees. We're now dealing with 4 generations in the workforce, and they all get their information and want their information in a different way. It's how to work within matrices and understand how to communicate in pockets that will help managers who are on the front lines be successful. So all of those skills are so critical to building the right toolbox for a communicator and help us as business leaders really help and support the business during times of important change.
It's such a great story. And, knowing Tim Ryan's leadership and what every company was facing at that moment. 2020 was a real crucible in terms of, I think, organizations understanding audiences a little differently, knowing employees are important and those inner rings of connection, but looking at it a bit differently. And, it's funny too. I joke, being in an agency environment, I've started to say to some of my leaders, because we're going through all kinds of change in a very positive way in order to pivot and continue evolving in a landscape that's changing fast and needs to, under a lot of pressure. Workers are under so much psychological and real pressure today. I mean, it's a tough world out there in that way. But, people want to try new things, but as you say, change is hard. Even something that they didn't like before, if you're going to change it, it's tough. And I joke with my leaders, say, hey, we work on some tough challenges for our clients and reaching audiences that are hard to reach, but no one's harder than our own folks for the best reasons. These are skeptical folks, type A, working hard, heads down on clients. So I love hearing what you're saying about this and just reflecting on those moments of your career that have felt like a real step change forward and expansion. And keeping on the employees for a moment, let's use that as a way to think about AI. We are in the midst of one of the greatest changes, I think, that we'll see in our lifetimes. I mean, I don't think that's an exaggeration. And the technological change is the pace of it is blistering. I think that as one way in the workforce, the pressure on it and the psychological pressure and the questions about it are a lot. And then the adoption is key. And I watched you at PwC start to walk that adoption path and start to help that with your own team and then with others. Now you're part of an ecosystem that has to scale that in much bigger ways and in a diverse environments. But how do you look at this big thing called AI as it's transforming our field? If you have to step back, like, how do you get your hands around what it means, what the top things you're thinking about, and how it's shifting the focus for you?
I think we started a couple years ago when AI started to come to the forefront, and we were thinking about it as a productivity and efficiency and a scale tool. And it absolutely is. I think if you ask many communications, corporate affairs departments now, they are using AI as an opportunity to create content more quickly, to A/B test it better, as well as do personalization at scale. And so it absolutely is an efficiency and productivity tool. It also is a co-creator of thoughts and someone to bounce ideas off of in a really safe and iterative, very quickly way. I think now organizations are turning to the AI search engines and the answer engine economy and saying, wow, regardless of which tool that you are using, these platforms are spitting out information that people are making real decisions off of. Which vacation do I go on? Which car do I buy? Which university do I attend? Right? These are major decisions that people are using AI to help them think through. And so as businesses and organizations are thinking through how to influence in the right way, we can't forget that AI is playing a big role in that influencing decision. And yet there's a lot of inputs that go into that, right? Things like press releases that perhaps had gone by the wayside are now back and really a valuable tool to influence the AI engines. Things like Wikipedia are increasingly important as an influencing tool. Certain media outlets, I can go on and on and on. But the real opportunity as someone is thinking through this is, how do we create the right ecosystem that will flood these platforms in the right way to give consumers, stakeholders the right information that they need at their fingertips and ones that we want them to know about in our organization? It's hyper-personalization at scale. I think that is a fascinating challenge for us, right? I've been in the profession for 20 years. I'm learning this alongside our most junior folks, right? And so talk about democratization of learning. They may get it more quickly than me, which I hope they do. That's awesome, right? But this is one where years of experience and skill doesn't give you the leg up. we're all learning this together. And so I've loved learning. Curiosity and learning are a big part of it. You take leadership profiles, and that's I always get that as I'm a big learner. I'm a big sort of focus on curiosity, and so I think this is fascinating. But it's also a huge challenge as we're trying to shape reputation for organizations.
Yeah, it's such a multi-layered thing, and how on the flip side of the coin, AI is, fuels misinformation, disinformation at scale. It's just there's a whole ecosystem to balance, and it's going to be so interesting to see. I love your thoughts about how do we, yes, gain efficiency, gain productivity, but also increase our speed to strategy, sharpen ourselves, learn faster, get to the insights faster. I think that's where experience can still help mentor to say, hey, I can gut check what I'm seeing. But then how do we understand again that narrative is an operating system, that's an ecosystem, and you've got a lot of stakeholders out there you've got to share that message with, and it's an interesting time to build that ecosystem out and have the why behind it even clearer, I think.
I also would say it's creating a ton of new jobs and new opportunities. We're hiring for AI embedded in roles. We're also hiring specialists. And so while there may be efficiency gain in the types of content creation skills that we used to spend a lot of time on, it's also creating new pathways for employment within our profession that wasn't there even just 1 or 2 years ago. And so uh, I always see these disruptive moments as, and in the end, going to push us forward. It may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps, but that's progress still, right? We're still getting 50% of the way further than we had before. I also think this is one where the profession has an opportunity to continue to learn from marketing and what it's doing and be a collaborator with marketing as you go forth, because what the AI search engines are doing is democratizing content. Just as much as you're getting it from the media, you're getting great information from our website, you're getting great information from newsrooms. And so, how do we create a new type of ecosystem that's working together? It requires even closer partnership with marketing than it had ever been before.
Absolutely. And from some of our marketing counterparts and clients, paid is changing. The impacts of paid digital, it's changing. And they're very aware of that as well. And I think that's where, again, we've got to bring those clicks of the dial where we may have those different perspectives. That becomes so much more powerful when they're put together. So in the last couple of minutes, I want to just hit you with a few sort of fun questions. And, hopefully those who listen, we have a wide range of listeners, some younger and older in their career in different places. And I know you've got a lot of wisdom to share. So you've been both agency and corporate side of the house. I am, as Kim Sample once said from PR Council, an agency animal. So, I've been agency the whole time. But when you think about those two sides of the house in this career, what have you brought from each of those?
I have loved that I have spent 50% of my career on agency and 50% in-house. I think that it brings a perspective of both sides of the profession that is so necessary. When you are on the agency side, you are on the edge of the profession, on the edge of creativity. You're seeing a broad swath of clients, a broad swath of business challenges and mega trends, and you can have your hand in a lot of different opportunities. It also, especially earlier in your career, gives you a chance to learn what you like and, more importantly, what you don't like to do. And and then what you don't like to do is just as important, if not more important, because it helps you narrow how do you chart your career path forward, and what opportunities you want to take on versus not. In-house has allowed me to hone my business skills and really get close to those that are not living day in and day out in the communications corporate affairs world, and test my business acumen and test my business knowledge. It also helps me ensure that I am creating teams, goals, and my career that's close to what the business needs are, as opposed to just doing something for the creativity or the wow factor. For those that are just starting in their careers, as I said, I encourage you to go to the agency, try stuff out, learn a lot. I also encourage people to go in-house because you get business acumen that you wouldn't have gotten being on the agency side. But what I've learned is that spanning both, agility is so important. The only constant is change. And you have to be able to, when you're the agency side, switch from client to client, challenge to challenge, the same as in house. Curiosity is critical, right? If you don't know something, go deep and learn it. And really try to be a close partner to those that are in the business or on the client side. I'll give you an example with this role too. Is I come up from a communications background. I had at PwC, GR was a partner to me. Now GR reports to me. So I had to really understand public policy and our lobbying and our advocacy agenda in a deeper way than I had ever been before. Equally, this is my first time at a public company. And so understanding investor relations and what it means to report earnings quarterly and how to engage with our investors in a meaningful way each quarter, but more importantly, beyond that quarter, to keep them engaged in our business strategy and where we're going and why we're going to that. Each of those different experiences has made me, I think, a better professional. I talked to you a little bit about change management. I thought I'd hate change management. In fact, it was the area that I have loved the most overseeing. It was also the hardest.
Yeah, often the things that are in leadership of all kinds, the things that are hardest, you learn the most, become most proud of. It's not easy, but that's where that growth comes from. It's like building that muscle. I love that reflection. Another fun thing is you were named to the 2026 PR Week Women of Distinction list. Congratulations. That was a
Thank you.
very
I
fun
was in good
honor.
company with you, Anne.
We were both on the list at the same time, which was very fun and special to me. Awards come and go, but this one did feel a bit special. What did it mean to you? What does that mark for you right now at this stage of your career, Megan?
I think the award PR Week started doing this 20 years ago. So at that point, I was just a young cub looking up and hoping I'd still have a job at some point. But I remember those lists coming out, and I remember I was at Edelman, and I remember one of my clients was on the list, and I remember celebrating her. We went to the award luncheon and sitting there and saying to myself, I want to be on this list one day. Not for vanity, but because I want to do something so meaningful in my career, and more importantly, to advance the profession, that people will want to put me on this list. I love this profession. I couldn't think of myself doing anything else. And to be on a distinguished list is incredibly humbling. And to be amongst amazing and powerful, and most importantly, kind women. I look across our class and I know many of them personally, and each one of us is incredibly great at our jobs, but we're also incredibly kind. You can't ask for anything more. I also have two daughters, and so for their daughters to see their mom get an award and have them be proud of me is just something incredibly special.
Well, I think that's an amazing place to end. This is a very generous field, and this conversation is just a great example of that. And Megan, thank you. This is so fun, and I especially enjoyed some of the topics we dug into. So thank you for appearing on Building Brand Gravity, and I encourage folks, there's been a lot of good episodes lately, so if you loved what you heard here, go check out the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.